Hello everyone! Unlucky Tug here, back at it again with more Sodor map stuff to talk about. Earlier this year, I made a huge hour-long video breaking down my map of the island of Sodor, as portrayed in the TV series, specifically the model era of the series. Before we get any further on this video, I recommend you go back and watch that one first, as what I talk about here won't make any sense without the first video's context. In that video, at the end, I mentioned that there were some locations I hadn't quite figured out yet. Not only have I placed all of them on this new map update, but I've also added in a lot of the major locations from the later hit model seasons, and made revisions to some locations so they make more sense in the context as presented in the episodes. Just to give you an idea of how much work has been done on this since the last video, here's the old map, and here's the updated one. Lots of updates, and lots to talk about. I am currently working on a huge, and I mean huge, timeline video of all events in the model seasons of Thomas, and this map plays a huge role in explaining this fictional island's history. So before I make that video, I wanted to present the map in its current form and explain my reasonings for all the changes. And just like before, this is all just my own explanations for things. None of this is hard fact, so please take what I present here with a grain of salt. So now that that's out of the way, let's jump into it. Go watch the first video first if you haven't already, and come back. This is your final warning to do so, because we are starting this now. Harwick and Church stations swapped. I've swapped the station sets on Arthur's branch line, as the episode Happy Ever After states the wedding takes place in Harwick.
At last, they reached the village where the wedding was to take place,
Which would make the church station Harwick, and the station Toby travels to in Special Attraction somewhere in the middle. It has no official name, so I've marked it as just Seaside Village. Bluffs Cove. I also placed this on Arthur's line, as not to overcrowd the Little Western with a bunch of stations. This station only appears a couple of times in the later model seasons, with no real indication of where it is, so it's on this line. Helps fill in all that open space a little bit. I also added a tunnel on Arthur's line, to account for the mountainy terrain in this area that makes up the nearby Misty Valley. Misty Valley. The episode Bad Day at Castle Lock states Callan Castle is in Misty Valley.
Lord Callan's castle is in Misty Valley.
So obviously the valley must be where the castle is. It makes sense that the area gets foggy, as it's near the ocean. Cyril the Fogman's cottage is located here. The Three Bridges. This was placed at the suggestions of several people, who all agreed that this makes the most sense on the part of the River Arle where Duck's line and Toby's old line cross each other. The bottom single track runs along the river to the harbor, which makes total sense to me, as every time we see an engine on it, they're always pulling goods. However, for this to work, we have to retcon the top bridge having rails on it and just accept it as a road bridge. We see Bulgy on it once, so fine by me. The Coastal Bypass. Okay, this one requires a bit of explanation. I made the coastal run, aka Arthur's line, run along the northwest coast to terminate at Harwick, and I've still maintained that. I got some comments asking, why did Henry take the Flying Kipper to Harwick in something in the air? And that got me thinking. Where would the location of the crash in this episode be? The Flying Kipper goes to the mainland, so why would the train be going up to Harwick? It makes no sense, as Thomas is in Harwick collecting fish for the train at the beginning of the episode, and brings it down to Knapford Harbor, so Henry wouldn't have to go there. The crash couldn't have been along that line, as it has to be somewhere before the main line goes inland. The Sam Wilkinson map tried to remedy this by having a secondary main line that runs along the south coast of Sodor. At first I thought this was kinda clever, until I realized it doesn't make any sense. Henry travels in the other direction in the episode, so this can't work. So it has to be somewhere on the west coast, but before Tidmouth where the main line goes inland. So where on earth could this be? Consulting the Island of Sodor book gave me an answer. I only recently learned from reading that the original Knapford and Elsbridge Railway had a track around the headlands to reach Tidmouth. These tracks didn't last very long as they were swept away in a storm, but I figured why not keep them for the TV map? This track around the headlands creates a bypass to Tidmouth, coming straight from the big harbor at Knapford. Voila! It was on this bit of track around the cliffs that Henry fell into the sea. This line also has a perfect spot for the ever enigmatic Thomas and Stepney beach station. The beach station in Thomas and Stepney. A bit of line has to connect from the big harbor to the coastal bypass, so I placed this station here, marked as Knapford Beach. It's just below the old harbor station, so technically has connections to Thomas's branch line. The Sportsfield Halt. This is on a double-tracked part of Thomas's line, so it has to be somewhere before Elsbridge, but it has to be after Dryaw, as Thomas goes through Dryaw to get to it in the episode it appears in. So I placed this after the bridge before Torrywreck. Crow's Farm Crossing. Missed this one before, but it has to be on the harbor line before Torrywreck. I placed the crossing here, just after this windmill. The express stops at Elsbridge. This isn't a change to the map, but just something I wanted to amend from the previous video. Before I stated the express doesn't stop at Elsbridge, but this is actually untrue. It doesn't stop at Elsbridge going towards Vickerstown, but going towards Tidmouth it does, as seen in Tenders and Turntables. So just like how the express only stops at Wellsworth in one direction when going towards Vickerstown, it also only stops at Elsbridge on return journeys. Elsbridge Junction. This also isn't marked on the map, but just a pretty regular location that I wanted to bring up. In the previous video, I mentioned that Thomas crosses over a series of points after Elsbridge to continue on his branch line. I like to think this overhead signal box is the location of the split-off, just past the station. McColl Farm. Okay, this is a pretty significant change. In the previous video, I explained my reasoning for McColl Farm being on Toby's line and not Thomas's. But since I'm taking hit era seasons into consideration for this now, I figured I should change it. McColl Farm is now on Thomas's line, and I placed it in the open farmland before Maithwaite. The number of tracks shown here is inconsistent. I like to think it's only 2 tracks, and the one closest to the farm is just a siding for wagons to be parked at the platform. The abandoned mine at Maithwaite. Not much to say about this one, but just wanted to mention that this is now marked just after Maithwaite. The Arlesdale End extension to Ulfstead Castle. Part of the reason I moved McColl Farm was to make some sense of the episode Toby Had a Little Lamb, where Toby travels along his line as a detour to get to the farm when Thomas's line is blocked by snow. The episode implies that Toby's line reaches Thomas's further down, and while I think it's dumb that these two lines, which were entirely different railways before, somehow met up at some point, I don't think it's impossible an extension to link them occurred after Toby's line was reopened and made a part of the Northwestern Railway. After Toby's line reopened in Season 5, the tracks were extended and met up at Ulfstead Castle. In Toby's discovery, it stated Toby now regularly takes passengers to the castle, so it must be a part of his daily route. Arlesdale End also appears as a station with a through line in the later model seasons, instead of a terminus, which supports this theory that the extension was a later thing. The Rickety Old Bridge. I moved this to the mining network instead of Toby's old line, the only reason being that the text says Toby forgets about it. If it was a regular location on his line, surely he wouldn't have forgotten. It's also old and dilapidated, which makes sense as it's a part of the old abandoned tracks to the mines. The Coal Mine and Miners' Halt. I marked this south of Ulfstead. I wanted the coal mine to be a part of the mining network in the heart of Sodor. Its connection to Thomas's line explains why Percy and Thomas are sometimes sent there. Henry's Forest. I saw some comments regarding the forest placement too. Previously I had Henry's Forest marked on the open area between Balladrin and Kelsthorpe, my reasoning being a giant forest makes more sense in an area that isn't super populated. However, going by Season 3 logic, the forest appears to be somewhere between Brendam and Knapford. In Gordon and the Famous Visitor, Gordon is seen going through Wellsworth, and then through the forest before reaching the viaduct, which narrows down its placement pretty inarguably. So I moved the forest to west of Wellsworth. The Flour Mill. The Sam Wilkinson map has this a part of the Brendam branch. I don't really know what the reasoning was for that, except for this one time we see Salty pass it. I guess that's why? There's no real indication of where this is in any episode, so it's on the Brendam branch. Why not? The Airport. I placed the airport above Kelsthorpe, as it is marked on several official maps. I like the idea of the airport being in an area that has lots of open space for a runway, which makes sense. Most big airports are on the outskirts of big cities because there's no room in the city for one. And considering the airport was built very recently in the timeline, I highly doubt there'd be room in Vickerstown or Knapford for one. It appears to be in the open countryside in the episodes, and its 3 tracks confirms it is definitely somewhere on the main line. The Suspension Bridge. I've moved the suspension bridge to a much farther eastern location going over the River Hoo. Mainly, I moved it because the engines were able to reach locations such as the airport and Kelsthorpe when the bridge was out in calling all engines. So moving it further east seemed like the logical move. The Cement Works. This is a fun one. The Cement Works is on its own line south of Kildane and Killabon. Yeah, weird, right? But hear me out. In Salty's Stormy Tale, Salty collects Fergus from the smelters to take him home, aka the Cement Works. The smelters, aka the Iron Works, is in Peelgodred here. From there, they travel down the seaside, going south. Unless the smelters is somehow in Harwick, there's no other place they could realistically do this. The Cement Works also has a backdrop of yellow cliffs that look very seasidey. Its weirdly isolated location also explains why we didn't see Fergus very often. And its close proximity to Kildane makes it easy for Patrick to load up on cement. Speaking of which, the Pack's Yard. This isn't marked, but just something I wanted to mention. The Pack's Yard is in Kildane. Kildane is a pretty packed city on this map, with a main line and 2 branches connecting to it. As a pretty busy inner city, to me it makes sense the island's major construction company would be based here in the center of the island. I would also like to amend what I said before and say that I do think the express does stop at Kildane. There's just so much here. Neville's Bridge. So I changed the entrance to the Peelgodred branch coming from the west for this. There has to be some sort of connection to the branch line from the west side. How else would Henry have gone up it in Haunted Henry going forwards, coming from Wellsworth? So I thought, why not a bridge that crosses over the main line? In the episode Thomas and the New Engine, Neville travels from Abbey on the Peelgodred line to this bridge, where he crashes and hangs above the 3-track main line. Good enough for me. The Old Quarry Bridge. Seems pretty obvious that this is on the Peelgodred line, somewhere above Cronk Abbey. Abbey. Marked this station as well. I hate how Abbey looks in the show. It's basically just Maron, but more boring. It has a bay platform, so it looks like a junction of some sort, instead of a middle station on a single-track line. Regardless, it's a station in the show, so I had to mark it. The statue of the steam team is located here. The Mid-Sodor extension to Peelgodred. On Audrey's map, the Mid-Sodor Railway did touch Peelgodred via King Ari's Bridge, so there's some precedent to this, despite the Mid-Sodor being in a totally different location on this map. I have no sets or anything to refer to support this change, but it was made purely for timeline video purposes, so I'll explain more in that. Stepney's branch line. Another major change from last time. As much as it pains me to say it, Stepney's branch line is on Sodor, and is the one to Norrumby. He collects passengers at Ballyhoo, which I'm going to say is this set here, and transports them to the sunshiny holiday town of Norrumby. The middle station is Bluebell Valley, where the line meets Narrow Gauge. The line is on the far east of Sodor, as far east as we can possibly get here, making him far away to the built-up parts of Sodor on the west side. Like the Cement Works, the line is hidden from the main line by tunnels, explaining why we didn't see Stepney too often. The line is also very short, only calling at 3 stations, which supports Stepney's complaints that his line is too short for a good run.
Everyone's been so kind, but my railway is so short and I do miss a good long run.
The Skarloey extension to Vickerstown. As much as this one absolutely kills me, even more so than Stepney's line being on Sodor, the Skarloey Railway at some point ran to Vickerstown. There's no way around it. In Rusty to the Rescue, Rusty explicitly says he goes to the same place Douglas found Oliver.
Where you found Oliver? You mean on the other railway? So, that's where I'll go.
Which was the exchange yards in Vickerstown. Before the other standard gauge railways existed, the Mid-Sodor and Skarloey Company built tracks through the Bluebell Valley to Vickerstown to create a full, complete rail link between it and Peelgodred. However, when the railway to Norrumby was built, the tracks from Vickerstown to Bluebell Valley closed, and when the Northwestern erected and built their main line, the whole rest of the line to Croven's Gate closed. The tracks are disused now, and only Rusty is allowed to run on them as the railway's inspection engine. He came across them during his time repairing the whole railway while Skarloey was away, and now sometimes travels along these for fun to go visit Stepney. Rusty is also the only one we ever see on these tracks, except for Skarloey once, who was helping a rescue team search high and low for Duke. I'm sure an exception was made for that specific case. The Dual Gauge Tunnel. I relocated the dual gauge tunnel north of Croven's Gate and as a part of the narrow gauge line to Bluebell Valley. I think the number one question I got on the previous video was, how did Boulder get to the yard with this tunnel in the way? Well, my answer to that is, well, how did it get through Renea's tunnel? No one ever asked about that one. Regardless, I moved the tunnel to the north of Croven's Gate, so this isn't an issue now. The slate cutting and transfer yard that Boulder destroyed I've completely removed from the map, and I don't really have an idea of where that could be now. It's not a super important location, so I'll let you all decide on that one. The Wharf. The Wharf is my favorite location introduced in the later model seasons. I love the idea of this big industrial complex where narrow gauge meets standard gauge, and it's a visually different setting for the narrow gauge engines. I very much prefer it to the Blue Mountain Quarry, if I'm being honest. Here's my explanation for the Wharf. In the Railway series, the railroad, which preceded the Skarloey Railway, ran from the slate mines to a wharf at Balladwale. Once the standard gauge railway to Kirk Ronan's harbor was built, this wharf closed. Well, since the Kirk Ronan line isn't something that was built until Season 5 in this timeline, I have the wharf still open and operating, with a standard gauge connection to it. Great Waterton. Great Waterton was a mining town and hub to a big mining network in the foothills of Sodor's mountain range. Once the mines dried up, everyone left the town for the more new populated parts of the island. In my interpretation here, the line to Great Waterton was one of the first standard gauge railways on the island, and it ran from the mines down to Balladwale Wharf. The line eventually became disused once the mines closed, but the southern part of the tracks to the wharf were maintained by the Northwestern Railway. The transfer yards. As depicted in The Great Discovery, going past the transfer yards goes towards Great Waterton. From here, Duncan takes Thomas to where the narrow gauge tracks ends, and then sends him on a fool's errand to find the wharf and get him lost. He of course doesn't, and finds Great Waterton instead. The standard gauge tracks to the transfer yards are old Great Waterton tracks, maintained for use by the Northwestern. The Old Trestle Bridge. I reworked the Howendoree River to accommodate the many other narrow gauge bridges we see, including this one. I have this one marked north of Glennock in the countryside. The Trusty Rusty Bridge. This one has replaced the viaduct's location, being near the Y after Skarloey Station. The Y is actually shown on screen just before it in the episode. The viaduct has now been moved to the foresty stretch between Reneas and Skarloey now. The picnic hall has also been moved here, overlooking the lake. The new branch line. In Season 7, the Skarloey Railway opened a new branch line to Rumblin Bridge. I have this marked as the old mid-Sodor tracks that were previously used to reach Boulder Quarry. The quarry is still closed, but the tracks were restored for use. Rumblin Bridge is located at the junction, and further up the line into the mountains is the Mountain Village, where the line terminates. Elephant Park opened later on in Season 7, and this was built on the tracks that descend to Boulder Quarry. And there you have it, folks. I think that is everything. Everything that matters anyway. There are still some one-off hit era locations I did not mark on this, like the ice cream factory, and the toy factory, and the balloon factory, and whatever the hell this station is. They thought this was good set design, really? But, you know, screw all those. It's not a perfect map, I'm aware of that, and I'm sure people have different interpretations of some locations, which is totally fine. But now with all of the major locations of the model series on one map, let's fact check this and see if it lines up with the routes shown in several different episodes. Thomas and the trucks. Thomas starts his journey at Knapford and travels north on the main line. He goes through Tidmouth off-screen and into Henry's Tunnel. He races through Elsbridge, then through Crosby and Wellsworth off-screen, and begins the ascend up Gordon's Hill. He races down the hill, crosses the River Mara, and slides into Maron. Thomas and Bertie. Thomas and Bertie start at the bus depot at the junction for the branch line. They pass the first crossing, go under the intro bridge, and stop at the first station, Dryaw. Thomas goes through Torryrek off-screen, under the road bridge there, and into Elsbridge. Takes on water, then races up the line, charges over the Els Bridge, goes through Maithwaite and past the watermill off-screen, into the Hackenbeck Tunnel, through Hackenbeck off-screen, and ends the race at Farquhar. A couple of locations are shown out of order to fill dialogue, but overall, checks out. Four Little Engines. Skarloey leaves Croven's Gate, goes through Crosney Kern off-screen, stops at Glennock, goes up the line through the tunnel and Reneas off-screen, stops at the picnic halt, then over the viaduct, and around the loop off screen. While going downhill on the return journey, he breaks down in the open countryside between the tunnel and Glennock. He presses on, goes around the loop, and ends the journey at Crovin's Gate. Bulldog. Duke and Falcon start at the old station and travel up the mountains. They approach and then go through the tunnel, where Falcon nearly falls, and then down the line where the train terminates at Skarloey. Thomas and Trevor. Edward collects Trevor at the orchard on his branch line. They go through Wellsworth. In a deleted scene, they go over the viaduct, through Crosby off-screen, and meet Thomas at Ellsbridge. Trevor is attached to Thomas's train, and he steams off down the branch line to the old harbor. Bertie's Chase. Edward leaves Wellsworth and travels south at the junction onto his branch line. Past the orchard off-screen, stops at the first station, Lower Sudbury, then he climbs the hill over the girder bridge, slides down the hill, and stops at Upper Brendam. Toby's Discovery. Toby travels along the tracks of the old mining network near Ulfstead. They come to the first junction and go north. They come to the next junction. North is the castle, south is the gold mine. They go north first and find Ulfstead Castle. Train stops play. Stepney collects straw from Knapford Harbor and sets off up Thomas's branch line. He passes through Dryaw, Torreyrack, and Ellsbridge off-screen and stops at the cricket field at Bulgy's Bridge. He then races up the line, through several stations, into Hackenbeck Tunnel, and then stops at Hackenbeck. Something in the Air. Thomas departs the fishing village at Harwick with trucks for the Flying Kipper. He travels south along the Little Western and at Tidmouth diverts along the coastal bypass, where he is stopped at the washed-out tracks. He proceeds and arrives at the harbor. Henry then leaves the harbor, also travels along the coastal bypass to be switched onto the main line when he reaches Tidmouth. He comes to the washed-out tracks and crashes. All at sea. Duck leaves Brendam Docks and races over the girder bridge, through Upper Brendam off-screen, and then meets Bertie at Lower Sudbury. He's shown on a few sets that are the Little Western and not the Brendam branch, but the places he starts and stops are all consistent. So let's give him this one. Haunted Henry. Henry leaves Wellsworth along the main line. He goes over Gordon's Hill and through Maron off-screen. Gets diverted onto the Peel Godred branch where the line becomes single track. Through Cronk Abbey and into the spooky foresty area of the valley. He doesn't stop at the crossover at Old Bailey Station and crashes before he reaches the viaduct. Oliver's Find. Oliver leaves Callan going south along the Little Western. He gets sent down the wrong line and finds himself on Toby's old line, goes through all these stations off-screen and ends his journey at Arlesdale End, where he crashes into Toby's old shed. Jack jumps in. Thomas travels down the Peel Godred branch through Cronk Abbey, arriving at Kildane to collect Jack. They somehow turn around and travel back up the branch line, through Cronk Abbey again and over the old quarry bridge. Toby had a little lamb. Toby leaves Callan to traverse his line to reach Thomas's. He goes along the whole branch, connects to Thomas's line at the extension, crosses over the rickety old bridge, and then down Thomas's line to McColl Farm. Thomas and the New Engine. Neville departs Abbey and races along the Peel Godred branch going south. He reaches the bridge where he crashes and dangles above the main line. He does pass McColl Farm, which is weird, but the main locations of call are correct, so it passes. Salty's Stormy Tale. Salty collects Fergus at the smelters, aka Ironworks, at Peel Godred, and they travel down the branch to Kildane. By the time they reach the tracks of the cement works, it's dark. They travel along the coastline and stop at the lighthouse. After the ordeal, they both go to Brendam Docks to see that the ship arrives safely. The Great Discovery. Thomas and Duncan start at the transfer yards. Duncan leads Thomas to where the narrow gauge tracks end. Thomas continues along, goes left at the junction to Rolling River Bridge. It collapses, he reverses to the junction, and then goes right. He follows the tracks to Great Waterton. The tracks continue forward, through the station, into the mines in the foothills. There of course will be those few episodes that don't make much sense when comparing the map to them, but I chalk that up to the writers just not being consistent. Inconsistencies date all the way back as far as Season 1. Remember when Percy travels over Gordon's Hill and somehow ends up at Lower Sudbury? Tisk tisk tisk. For the most part, I think this map works really well, and it's what I'm going to stand by for the upcoming timeline video. So just like last time, a link to a high quality JPEG of this map is in the description. Feel free to do what you want with it. And if you want to use it as a reference for your own series or videos, please feel free to do so. Thank you all so much for watching, and I'll keep you all updated on the model series timeline video as work on that continues. Peace out!